I talk about AI governance all the time. So when I saw a book, Rewiring Democracy, all talking about this, my instant thought was, this is AI governance. Bruce Schneier and Nathan E. Sanders joined me for a conversation about their book, about those principles, and how to apply it in IT services on this bonus episode of The Business of Tech. This episode is brought to you by Control Map. Growing MSPs are using Control Map to build recurring revenue by expanding their GRC services. Starting now, Control Map is offering a free plan for MSPs looking to get started with providing compliance as a service. Create a free account and run an assessment. Track key items like policies, risks, and evidence in one place. It's a practical way to prove value to a client before deciding to expand your compliance offering. Try Control Map for free today. Visit scalepad.com/Dave to get started. That's scalepad.com/Dave. Well, Bruce, Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, great to meet you. Thanks for having us.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you because, as I went through the book and spent my time reading what you guys are working on with Rewiring Democracy, I really resonated with the idea that, okay, this is a set of ways of thinking about AI governance, right? And so let's start with the book itself. And you guys have kind of laid out some of the ways you think AI will reshape power in politics, lawmaking, and citizenship. Like, give me a little bit of your thinking about like the most urgent opportunities and risks right now that we should be considering.
Well, I think the biggest risk that we call out is the potential for AI to transform our society in a way that concentrates power. We recognize that today there's a small number of corporations, which, by the way, primarily based here in the US, in Silicon Valley, small number of corporations we can all rattle off the top of our heads, that are dominating value extraction from this technology. We're talking just a few days after NVIDIA, for example, hit a $5 trillion valuation. And that represents just a massive, previously unfathomable concentration of power. And for democracy and for the principles of how we would like a democratic society to run, that presents really important challenges. And we try and think through in our book what an alternative vision for this technology is that can more broadly distribute power throughout our society, that can help us realize those democratic principles in a better way, and also to make our government more efficient and to serve people better.
And this also holds true for businesses as well. We know what happens when a few companies control the critical technology and prices go up, quality goes down. And this technology needs to be democratized, needs to be broadly available. And the way to do that is to reduce the concentrations of power. It's a hard thing to do, but it really is essential.
So that was actually sort of what I was thinking about. I'm going to start by asking you, like, some of the things you think about are making AI transparent, fair, and accountable. That feels like a good implementation framework regardless. Give me a little bit of the way that you think you can accomplish that with the right implementation framework.
Well, the first thing that's going to happen is I think the tech is going to democratize itself. We are seeing the cost to build these core models come down substantially. And we are seeing smaller organizations, even non-governments, create their own models. They're not at the top, but they're one step below. And as that becomes more possible, as many organizations, companies create core models, that'll naturally break the monopolies. Now, that doesn't address the fact that these are opaque models. And there we want transparency, we want responsiveness. I think regulation plays a role in here. But, depending on how the ecosystem goes, competition could do a lot.
And when it comes to accountability, we think a lot about how to provide oversight and to make the AI developers meaningfully responsive to public input for our context for democratic purposes, but in a business context, also accountable to their clients. And as Bruce said, if you have a concentration of power in a small number of companies, they don't have to be accountable to their clients. They know that they've got effectively a monopoly, or they're part of a small number of companies that are the only options in town, and therefore they don't have to be responsive. They don't have to be accountable to building trust. They don't have to be accountable to changing practices when their clients are unsatisfied with them. So that's part of why we focus on concentration of power. It's also part of why we think about how to broaden the set of developers that are involved in the AI ecosystem that are producing models and services for public use, And for our purposes, we think of government and civil society as potential players in building AI technologies as well as corporations.
Now, Bruce, you alluded to this, so I'm going to throw a premise at you both, and I want to get your take on this a little bit, because I've been thinking a lot about that intelligence layer and the value that companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, like the model builders put out there. And I'm starting to liken this both to the airline industry and the shipping industry. Capital intense industries that require a lot of investment, but end up with really, really low margins and are generally considered bad businesses, but the rest of us get incredible unlock for them being there. For example, business travel unlocks a lot, but none of us really want to be in the airline industry. The shipping industry, not a really difficult business to be in, but because we have it, it allows for incredible kind of trade. Now, that does frame things a little differently. Does that resonate with you in the way to think about these risks, or do you think AI is uniquely different?
I don't think we know yet. I think it's likely to be that. I mean, these models are basically interchangeable. I mean, in some ways, it's surprising that these companies with different development teams doing different things, you look at the benchmarks, they're all about the same. Like, it doesn't matter much which one you pick. But those are for the general models. My guess is that for businesses, the specific models are going to be better. You don't want an AI that does everything. You want an AI that is a travel agent, or is able to order supplies for your business, or is a therapist, right? Has a specific skill. I think that's going to be smaller models. I think that's going to be more tailored models. And I think the value is going to come there. So you're probably right that the model that does everything okay is a race to the bottom, but specific expertise, like specific expertise in humans, ends up being valuable.
And I would add to that, I think another thing we don't know for sure yet is just how capital intensive this will be in the future. As Bruce alluded to, there's been a democratization already. The cost of training large language models in particular has come down by orders of magnitude. The cost of doing inference with applying large language models has also come down by orders of magnitude. And that's a trend that we see continuing. When GPT-4 was trained, the estimate for a cost of order $100 million, not to invent the technology, which is a whole other expense, but just to execute the training loop. We know that that's come down a lot. In the future, it may be very feasible for a much smaller organization on a much smaller budget to train meaningful models, especially in a specialized context, and also for us to deploy them not with massive compute and data centers that are sprouting up all over the world, but on our phones to miniaturize these models in a way that can be distributed and democratized just as much as the training is.
Now, you guys spent some time as well, both of you, acknowledging the risk of bias in systems. And I thought this was also another really interesting area, because that inherent bias that can be built into these models can be really impactful for those that are trying to get some kind of dependable business outcomes out of these things. In the same way that we want to make sure that we're implementing them in a society to make sure that we understand the impacts. Like, how can providers ensure that their AI-driven decisions are both fair and perceived as legitimate by addressing bias? Have you guys given some thought on the best approaches for that?
We give it a lot of thought to that. You're not going to get unbiased models, just like you're not going to ever get unbiased humans. And some biases we tend to call them values. Bias for fairness, a bias for equality, justice, kindness. I mean, we can imagine biases that we want. I think the important thing here is going to be transparency, and knowing what the biases are before you use it. So just like you might choose to hire a human with certain biases because they're the ones you want in that role, you might choose an AI with a certain set of biases. The problem is less the bias and more that it is opaque.
And with respect to the responsibilities of providers, I think we're also seeing, and we will continue to see unfolding in the courts and different jurisdictions around the world, questions about who's responsible when an AI model is biased in an undesirable way. One of the first examples of that we saw in the US and that we write about in our book is the case of the pharmacy chain, which was one of the first held accountable for a biased implementation of a security system that they had built into their stores that included facial recognition software that proved to be racially biased. It led to the pharmacy chain systematically calling the police on Black customers and having them escorted from their store because they were misidentified by the facial recognition software. Now, in that case, the pharmacy chain was held accountable. But you can imagine equally a question, should it be the security provider? Should it be the AI developer that developed the facial recognition system that the security provider used? Those are questions that require a lot more, I think, working through the courts before we have definitive answers. I think ultimately what we advocate for in the book is that we shouldn't think of that as solely a problem of the AI. It's really a systemic issue. It's equally a problem of how the retailer chooses to implement those systems, how they choose to empower their human personnel to pick up the phone and call the police when something is flagged to them. And we really want to govern the overall behavior, not just the individual entity of the technology company that's providing the solution.
We'll be right back after this message. This episode is supported by Comet Backup. Not all heroes wear capes. Some live among us, quietly saving businesses one help desk ticket at a time. Whether you're battling ransomware, hardware failure, or human error, Comet's powerful backup and recovery solutions put you in control. Manage all your backups in Comet's simple, centralized platform. Protect computers, servers, virtual environments, emails, and databases. When disaster strikes, be the hero your business needs. With Comet Backup, you're not just saving the data, you're saving the day. Comet Backup, for the everyday IT heroes. Visit cometbackup.com to start your free 30-day trial today. Get $100 free credit when you sign up with the promo code MSP Radio. Comet Backup. Be the hero. Save the day. And we're back. Well, Nathan, that's exactly where I'm going with all of this, because that feels like, particularly in a business context, like that's the opportunity for service providers to lean in and help customers guide on that. Because the book discusses not only how AI will change legislation, but also the regulatory environment and the judiciary. I think of that all as, hey, that's the compliance governance frameworks that we use for technology. So is there advice for IT providers, for those advising on technology right now, to prepare for new compliance regimes?
I think the primary advice that we can give is to test those systems. Don't assume that they're going to be delivered to you in an unbiased way. Don't assume that the current regulatory regime and current compliance responsibilities will stay the same. With facial recognition, we already know that these systems tend to be biased racially and perform differently on people with different skin colors. It may be that vendors claim that they've already accounted for that bias and controlled and mitigated it, but I think those who are implementing those systems should not rest on that assumption. They should actively test them. We write a lot about government implementations of software and AI solutions like this, and we call for governments to actively do that debiasing, not to assume that the technology will work in a fair way, but to set up testing and monitoring regimes that can help them measure and mitigate those biases where they exist.
Gotcha. Now, Bruce, one of the things I noticed in researching for today was that you really advocated for a lot of strong AI regulation. Now, the critics argue that excessive regulation stifles innovation, and they make an argument particularly around smaller businesses and startups. So how do you respond to concerns that those might slow progress or disadvantage those new entrants?
I think it's largely bullshit. Regulation spurs innovation. And the problem we often have is that there's a problem, the environmental problem. There's some problem that society needs to solve, and the companies see no profit in solving it because, it doesn't affect the market. What a regulation does, a well-written regulation, is it makes a market for solving the problem. So if we're worried about AI transparency, and that's actually hard to do, right? These systems are opaque. There's going to be research required, development required. Companies aren't going to give it to us unless there's a regulation that says you have to. Now suddenly there's an enormous potential for innovation in how to figure out how to make these systems transparent. So especially if you're a small business, a good regulation is an opportunity for you to figure out how to meet it.
How do you address the criticism that would citizens have the expertise to engage in meaningful, complex AI policy debates in the current world? Like, how do you get people to that level of education that they can contribute?
I'm a big believer in participatory democracy as a core function and tenet of how a democratic system should work. And I'm a big believer in the capacity for technology to help improve and scale that participation function and to help more people participate in democracy. And I wouldn't accept the criticism that not everyone has expertise to share. I would recast that and I would say people have different expertise to share. Someone who joins a policymaking discussion about AI may not bring technical expertise about the implementation of that technology and the proper models to use or the regulatory frameworks, but they probably bring an important lived experience that can help legislators understand what are the real world impacts of governing this technology in a different way. What are the real world impacts of making a technology perhaps more expensive for people to access and that limits its use? My vision for participatory democracy is that over time, more and more people can participate. We should lower the barrier of entry. We should make it easier for legislators and policymakers to take in and synthesize and meaningfully respond to that input. And we should recognize that people are bringing very different experiences, very different perspectives, all of which can be relevant to a policy discussion.
And AI can help here. There's lots of organizations trying to build AI tools to assist in collaboration and consensus building and conversation. If you think about it, it's things good human facilitators do. We don't have enough humans and we need to do it at scale. So some of these systems, there was a online citizen assembly in Germany. There's almost 500,000 people. Taiwan uses this kind of system to help citizens discuss legislation and make policy recommendations. A lot of places where people would participate more if it were easier. And I think we need to think about how to make it easier. And then you're right, people will participate at different degrees depending on how much they care, how much they know, how much it matters. And that's okay, right? A democracy needs all kinds.
How do you think about balancing and responding to the critics that we do need to really push a lot of this because there's a lot of ability to erode our values and damage society when we think about it. How do you respond to that?
I mean, basically they're right. We have a whole bunch of problems here, right? You mentioned, the AI is doing bad things. That's really bad people with AIs. AI is a power enhancing technology and putting in the hands of an autocrat or a monopolist, you're going to have bad outcomes. I worry more about two things. I worry about the computer security, right? These AI systems are just computer programs, right? Written in software, running on hardware, in networks. And we have a lot of computer security problems, and they're going to transfer directly. And then we have this problem of what's being called prompt injection, the ability for an outsider to inject data into an AI that is interpreted as a command and does a thing the owner of the AI didn't intend. These are real serious problems. These are barriers to adoption everywhere. I certainly don't minimize them. And we're working on them. In the book, we tend to be optimistic longer term about the technology, but we don't sugarcoat the problems of getting there.
Well, you've certainly identified all the areas that I think are worthwhile for MSPs and IT service providers to be talking about. Bruce Schneier is an internationally renowned security technologist, lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, and chief of security architecture at Interrupt Incorporated. He is a prolific author of 14 books, including Data and Goliath and A Hacker's Mind, and is recognized for shaping the global conversation on cybersecurity, technology policy, and civil liberties. And Nathan E. Sanders is a data scientist and researcher focused on participatory policymaking and the intersection of technology and democracy. He's held positions in the Massachusetts legislature and at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center. Gents, if people are interested in reaching out, getting a copy of the book and learning more, what's the best way for them to do so?
I'm at Schneier.com. Everything I write is there. The book is available wherever fine books are sold, either in person or online. Nathan will hold up a copy when he tells you where to find him.
And I'm online at nsanders.me. And yes, you can find Rewiring Democracy at almost every bookseller from our publisher, MIT Press.
I noticed the pixelated Athena on the cover.
It was a great read. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank
you so much.
Want more from the Business of Tech? Join Business of Tech Plus for ad-free episodes, early interviews, extended cuts, subscriber-only shows, and exclusive member perks and analysis. Sign up at businessof.tech/plus. And follow this show in your podcast app, and if you're on YouTube, hit subscribe and the bell so you never miss a story. Reviews and comments help spread the word too. Interested in advertising? Head to mspradio.com/engage. The Business of Tech is written and produced by me, Dave Sobel, under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next episode.